give a little introduction here?
Yeah, so let's kick it off. Welcome everyone at this part 2 of the MEDDPICC webinar. Let's first roll into the introductions.
Cool. Okay, so we're going to do introductions, and then we're going to go into the MEDDPICC part of this, and then Q&A. So hi everyone, I'm Michael Davies. I am a director of go-to-market at Aries Global Software Group. Who is Aries? In case you're wondering, so Aries is a group of mostly or a lot of former Snowflakes. So we spun out of Snowflake. Snowflake was one of the fastest growing technology companies of all time, biggest software IPO in history. I think it still is. Massive data and analytics firm. I think it's about 5 billion revenue per annum now. When I joined, I think I was employee 500, but our founders of Aries were employees number 1 and 2 in Europe, and really helped build it out from 0 to hundreds of millions in revenue per annum, about 500 employees or something across Europe by the time we left. So really fast growth over 7 years. Why does that matter? We've seen a lot, and we kind of went through what many companies might do in sort of their lifetimes growth in a very short period of time. So it's super exciting, and we're using that insight to help companies like Workspace 365 grow, and we're also investing in those great companies as well. So yeah, just looking for really exciting technologies that are really kind of driving a lot of transformation within organizations, which Workspace 365 definitely is. A bit more about me. So I've run sales for EMEA and a bit of Asia as well. And I built a business over 7 years from 0 to 40 million annual revenue per year. In financial services. Then I joined Snowflake and really helped build out their banking financial services business, onboarding customers like Barclays, NatWest, and so on. The largest deal I've ever done was 15 million over 3 years. But actually the largest annual contract I did was 11 million. But also I've done some small deals as well. So very recently I did one for about $90 for one of our portfolio companies that I was helping. So big and small, what we're going to cover today is certainly valid regardless of the size of transaction you're doing. And then finally, I'm also a buyer of technology. So my largest purchase was about 1 million per annum. And so I really sat on the other side and had technology and services sold to me. And I think that's given me a really good kind of understanding of like how I want to be sold to, what good looks like, what bad looks like as well. So yeah, so that's enough about me. And I'll pass over to Stan. Hi, Stan.
Hey, so not that big of a list for me comparing to you, Michael, but for all the Dutch attendees, I'm mainly the partner account executive for the Dutch region, and I help partners training how to sell Workspace 365. So also if there are a bit more like personal questions to your Dutch field or also global, please ask. Today we are going to talk about MEDDPICC. But I think if you can translate it to your own like company and your own customers, that's going to bring the most value. So please ask your questions in the chat.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. So I think you were going to cover off a little bit here about the last webinar.
Yeah, so last webinar was about communication simplified, where we talked also about our communities being launched. This is also going to be recorded. This webinar, last webinar was also recorded, and you can still watch it back. We are going to talk about all the ways of simplification we have in our module Engage. Sorry to interrupt, Michael. I think
it started back at the start of the previous webinar, hasn't it? Annoyingly, even though I started it on the right slide, it's gone all the way back. So I'm just going to flick through to, sorry, apologies, everyone. I'm going to go through, this is why it's throwing me. I'm just going to flick through to the correct part in the presentation. Apologies for that. Okay, cool. So here we are. Right, apologies. I don't know why it's gone back to the very start.
Still human.
Oh, it's done it again. hang on. Why can't it just do start from beginning? Why can't I start from the actual slide I want to start on? How weird is that? Sorry, everyone. Gotta love a UE, a user error. Also, I don't use Microsoft that often. I'm more of a Google person. Right.
You can't say that in this webinar, Michael.
No, I know,
You
I know.
that.
Don't. It's just what we end up using every day. For some reason, I only have the option to start from the beginning. I don't know why. I'm going to try this one last time. No. Right. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to have to just flick through, which, there we go. You get to see a little bit about what we covered off last time, which is wonderful. And now it's loading.
Technology is such a beautiful thing if it just
I
works.
know. It's just brilliant, isn't it? This wouldn't have happened if this was running on Workspace 365. That's all I
So this is the feedback we are also getting in healthcare. Like the end users we are serving within healthcare are just saying like, it just needs to work. I don't want to know how it works. I don't want to know what technology is behind. It just needs to work. It just needs to be simple, which today isn't.
Yeah. And it's running very, very slowly now. Very strange, right? Come on, let me flick forward. Oh, God. Again, Workspace 365. So look, while we're just getting through to the slide I wanted to start on, what I was going to say is, look, what we're going to try and cover off today is MEDDPICC, right? So MEDDPICC really is a lot of things to a lot of people, and I'll come on and explain a little bit more about what MEDDPICC is, or MEDDPICC as it's sometimes referred to. But the key thing here is that this is a framework. You know, some people call it a selling process, of selling technique. Potentially it is. But really, it's a framework, and it's used by the world's most successful technology firms to drive predictable and really important efficient growth. And why do I say that? There's a great company, I think it's RepView, that puts this up, and they talk about the efficiency in terms of ARR growth generated per salesperson within an organization. And I think Snowflake is top of that, which is something to be very proud of. But many of these companies that appear on here have gone to IPO or been acquired, Cisco, Dynamics, but they all have a fantastic reputation for being some of the best technology sales companies in the world. And there really is a reason for that, in that MEDDPICC is used across all of these firms. And so, ultimately, what is it doing? It's making selling better. And there's some very good reasons for that. So look, MEDDPICC, or MEDDPICC, as it's kind of been expanded to, is an acronym, right? So it stands for all of these wonderful letters that these words that you see in front of you. So M for metrics, E for economic buyer, D for decision criteria, D for decision process, P for paper process, I for identification of pain, C for champions, and C for competitions. Now, in the last session, we covered off metrics, identification of pain, and champions. So in today's session, we're going to cover the remaining phrases or terms. And we're going to also spend a little bit of time on value-based selling, or command of the message, which is, for me, how a lot of this comes and is brought together to actually enable you to sell, not just use this framework for deal qualification, for the map, the roadmap, the sort of guide that we'd use to navigate yourself around complex deals. But the official the term here that's used is a project-based approach to selling that maximizes revenue while delivering results on your timeline. So really, what I'm using this framework for is for a number of things. But for me, as I said, it's a guide. It's a way to navigate a deal. Even smaller deals and opportunities, many of these things will still apply. Obviously, you're not going to spend as much time on a smaller deal as you are on a bigger deal, but all of these things are still as equally important. So when I'm looking to kind of do my evaluation on a deal, I'm going to look through what information I have on all of these different aspects of MEDDPICC or MEDDPICC, and then where I've got gaps, where I don't have understanding of, like, what are the key metrics, what's the pain, what's the champion, who's the champion, who are the competition, what's the decision criteria. That tells me what I need to go and now find. Every meeting that I go into with a prospective customer, or a customer, if you're looking to upsell an existing, an existing contract, I want to try and make sure that I've mapped out as much information as I can on here, so I truly understand what is the pain that I'm solving, what are the metrics associated to that, who are my sort of influencers, my champions, my economic buyer, and then what do they care about, like what's their decision criteria in doing a deal, and so on. So we're going to dive into these a little bit more now. Now, for me, this is the next most important one, the economic buyer, and it's probably the hardest one to get right. And the thing about MEDDPICC is that just knowing what these words mean is just part of it, right? Yes, you need to try and find out who the economic buyer is, right? So who is the economic buyer? The definition here is the person with discretionary approval to spend. But for me, it's a little bit more than that. It's the person who can give the ultimate yes or no to a project. So ultimately it's the person who can say yes or no when everyone else is saying the opposite, right? That's the person we need to try and find out and get to. That's the most important thing. Can we get to them? And that's the bit for me that is still the hardest and most difficult part of MEDDPICC. It's getting EB access, and we keep referring to it as EB for those people who don't like acronyms, but there are so many in sales. And this is the really challenging bit, right? And something that I still find very hard, and it is because it is very hard, right? You're trying to get in front of someone who is very, very important in an organization, and in many cases, that person doesn't really want to meet with you, like particularly if you're smallish company, your transaction size isn't particularly big, it's not really on their radar. So the trick really here is to try and get this person like in front of this person or get on their radar, right? So how do we do that? Well, I think that the first thing is we need to try and find out who this person is, and that person can be very different in all organizations depending upon the transaction size. That's the key thing here, right? The economic buyer can be different depending on what the deal is and how big it is, and it isn't always the CFO or the CEO or the C-level person. For a smaller transaction, it could just be a head of department or something like that. If you've ever bought technology or worked in any firm, you probably understand that up to a certain size of transaction, there will be a person that can approve that transaction. I've worked on teams where up to 50,000, potentially I could sign off. 100,000 or so would be my boss, with very little oversight, right? Because you've got a budget and you've got discretionary, to really go and purchase things up to that point. When you go above a certain level, then there's potentially a different process, right? I know that in some of the banks I've sold into, as soon as a transaction went above $1 million, a whole different process. Potentially the board was going to get involved and it'd have to go up and be ratified there. But so the point is really is like, we've got to think about who is buying, who are the key stakeholders and what's the size of transaction. So then that's going to change things. So how do we find out who this economic buyer is? Well, you've got to ask your champion, your sponsor. That is the person that is going to really be able to understand who it is that we need to go and speak to, right? And again, it isn't always obvious. So for me, the secret of going and getting EB access is you've got to go through your champion most of the time. And the trick and how you do that is the art really of MEDDPICC and MEDDPICC. One of the techniques I used to use was around like POVs or POCs. So at that point, you've found your champion, you've got pain, that champion's got pain, and you've sort of proved or aligned yourself to that champion, and they feel like your solution can solve their problems. At that point, that is when you've got a champion, and they are going to go and try and help you sell for you in this business. And so that's the point when we probably want to try and get EB access. And one way that we can try and do it, because quite often champions don't want to give you that access, they don't want to like lose control or put you in front of their boss, is through leverage through a POC or POV. So at that point, your proof of concept, the champion wants to test the product, see whether it works, and really then you've got to try and pull back, withhold access to resources for that POV, access to the platform, and request and say, look, we won't give you access. We're not going to do that until you give us EB access. Now, that's quite a blunt way of going around things. So what I've tend to find has worked in the past is say, look, in my experience, we've gone and done these proof of concepts, these proof of values, and we get to the end of it, and we find out we've actually missed some key things that we needed to test for key stakeholders within the business, particularly the big boss who actually wanted to see X, Y, Z, or have it deliver against certain kind of business requirements that they had, or meet certain business needs that they had. So in my experience, we need to try and get all of the key stakeholders together, map out what exactly it is that you need, your requirements, and then make sure that we build a proper POV, proper test to meet those requirements, and work out that if we meet those requirements, it will deliver certain business benefits to the firm. We put all that together in a plan, and then we go and present it to the economic buyer. And we basically say, look, Mr. Economic Buyer, if we meet all of your requirements and we can deliver these kind of results, is this something that you would invest in? So at that point, we're probably going to put some sort of small commercial together to them. The EB at that point will either say yes or no. So this is what we refer to as an EB go, no go meeting. So that's kind of one of the key ways that we would actually go and get access to this EB. And look, if your champion says, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do that, then probably at this point, you should just pull out. It does depend, but we find time and time again, these deals fall out. And they don't close. You end up doing a POV, and then it goes nowhere because the EB hasn't given his backing to or blessing to what you're actually doing. You can go through all this, and then there's no budget. It's not a priority. So for me, that's the kind of one key way. The second one is really to use kind of senior people within the organization to reach out directly to that economic buyer if the champion is blocking. But it's really, really important to do this, right? And what we found at Snowflake was actually that where we didn't have the EB involved, there was a huge drop in the deal closing, right? In enterprise selling. So that's enterprise win rates. For me, in my experience at Snowflake, there is only one time that I've had a deal not close that I actually thought would close. I thankfully didn't commit it, which was good, saved my bacon. But I really thought that deal was going to close. They were already a customer. They purchased a small amount. They were building out their enterprise capability on Snowflake. They had purchased about $500,000 of technical resources from us. So for as far as I was concerned, it was an active project. It was going. We'd already met the EB on the first deal. And then we were trying to do the big upsell, the really big, significant multi-year contract. And we couldn't get access. And our champion was like, no, there's no point. He doesn't want to see you. And I was like convinced this deal was how my boss wasn't. And look, he was right. And that was the only time in my entire career there where I had a deal which fell out, where I really thought it would do. And it was because of this. And if I'm honest with myself, as you should be with yourselves as well, if you don't have that access, then really the deal that you've got is very much at risk. And the data backs that up. So moving on, decision criteria. So for me, this is like the next most critical piece of MEDDPICC after the other bits we've covered. And so what is it really? These are the factors by which your prospective customer is going to make a decision about whether to choose your product or another or do nothing, right? So these are the capabilities that they're assessing to see whether or not you meet their requirements, right? And those are both technical and business criteria. So what do I mean by that? So technical, does it have 24/7 uptime? Is it Windows compatible? Does it actually run faster than what they currently have? By how much? Does it have I don't know, certain ISO security and compliance certificates? Does it actually allow the people that are using it to be more productive? If so, by how much? Right. So these are all the kind of technical sides of things, but then there's also the business side of this as well, which is we partly alluded to. How much faster does it run? How much more productive does it make people? But then what is the output of that in terms of metrics that the business cares about? Cost savings, additional revenue generated. We need to try and understand both. Why do we need to do that? Well, because if we are not generating enough return for the business, then is this going to get prioritized? Typically, IT departments have got 1,000,001 projects that they need to do, and they can only deliver so much. So if your proposal, your benefits that you're delivering to the business are not enough or not enough of a priority, then they won't care. And what I mean by that last point, right? There's plenty of times when I've been selling into like super high growth technology companies, for example, where they didn't care about saving money. They've got loads of venture capital money flooding into them. All they care about is growing faster. So you've got to try and align to what that business cares about. And then the final piece that I would say on these decision criteria, for me, this is the battle that you will go into with your competitors. And so it's really important for us to not just understand what their requirements are, but also understand what the priority of those requirements are. How important are they against each other? And why is that important? Because what you can do, which is quite sneaky as a seller, is try and skew the requirements and the priorities more towards your capabilities. So a really good example here is, at Snowflake, we were always up against this pesky Databricks competitor of ours. And they would always try and do this to us. Like they would try and pick the things that they knew they were better at than us and skew the proof of concepts, the requirements more towards those. So classic one was real time, right? And they would say they were better at real time than we were. And maybe back then that they were, but so what? Was real time really important to delivering the use case that was actually being discussed? Or was it just a simple checkbox that IT had chucked in there and said, oh yeah, we have to have this, right? And so one is, is that really needed? And then secondly, how is it needed, right? And what are the precise requirements here? So what does real time even mean? Real time could be 5 seconds, 30 seconds, sub 1 second, sub 0.1 millisecond. So really, if we can try and uncover this and understand what is the real requirements, the real depth of it, and is it what's really needed, then do you know what? If your product meets their minimum requirements, so what? Then it doesn't really matter, right? And we can try and play up other things that we know we're better at than our competitor. So for me, this is like the most kind of tactical, almost like chess, that you're going to play versus your competitor, and one of the most kind of exciting and interesting things that we need to try and dive into. And how I would typically do it within the sales process is, after we've had a really good meeting with our champion and we've got sponsored next steps, so we've basically got an opportunity, I would suggest let's get all the key stakeholders together, and we're going to do a proper deep dive on their use case, looking at the current state, the challenges they have, and then why those challenges exist, and then understand the requirements of like how they would solve that problem and the positive business benefits, prioritize everything, map all of that out into a nice document, which we call like a technical deep dive or a use case deep dive. And that forms the basis for your POC plan. So you can typically go in and do that in an hour, 2-hour session, and that will really set you up success so that you can win more POCs. And look, this may seem like overkill, right? If you're winning every POC and you're always progressing through and closing deals, fine. Maybe you don't need to spend time on this. But if you're constantly falling over at the POC stage, these are some of the things that we really need to think about. Why are we falling over? Are we losing our POCs, right? Then we probably need to work better on this. If we're winning our POCs, but it's getting blocked by some unknown person, then it's probably because you don't have EB access and you haven't aligned to the EB's priorities. So out of everything we're discussing now, decision criteria, EB, these are the most important things we need to get right.
Yeah, and I think what's good to mention, Michael. So within Workspace, we are in healthcare and government very active, and those are two verticals that are under financial pressure. So the part about business value, and I hope it resonates for everyone who's listening. If not, please ask your questions, or if you see other components who make this whole process or to create the urgency, then please ask in the chat, because I think the urgency is very important. And it's not getting urgency if the vertical you're in is under financial pressure, for example. If you miss the business value, you will end up at the end of the list, And I think that's what we are talking today about. And if you see other struggles or you have a different vertical but also financial pressure, you can ask it in the chat, because I think it's good to translate into your specific customers and verticals.
Yeah, and I think, specifically to Workspace 365, some of the criteria that they might have, right, on the business side, saving time for their employees, right? That will be really important. Reducing the amount of kind of logins, time that these employees are spent looking for their apps, their tools, and so on. In some companies, that's going to be really important. In others, it just isn't, right? And they're not worried about worker productivity. They're more worried about cost cutting, right? So, a really good example here would be they've already got SharePoint, but they've got a massive team of people using it, or they've got SharePoint and actually, people hate, the end users hate interacting on it via the internet side of things. These are potential decision criteria that they'd be looking for improvements in, that you could align to with Workspace 365, for example. So the next couple of ones of MEDDPICC I'm going to go through pretty quickly, but ultimately final kind of like parts of the MEDDPICC puzzle. Decision process, really important for us to understand what that decision process is fully. Time and time again, I have gone through what I thought was the full sell process or the sell cycle. Thought we'd done everything, and then there's some final thing that someone in InfoSec or finance has like put a blocker to. And so it's so important for us to try and map out what this full decision process is with our champion. And so telling that story, look, Mr. Champion, Mr. Sponsor, whoever it may be, we typically see this happen time and time again, and it causes massive delays to projects, and actually it can even kill them, because if you spend a lot of resources like testing out something and then you're being told you need to go back and test again, maybe you don't have the budget, the time, this time IT block it, say we're not spending more time on this. So we really need to try and map this out in advance. And the biggest problem is quite often the champion doesn't know the full decision process. Like, this is so regular, particularly if they've not purchased technology before in their organization. So we need to ask the champion, and then if we know that that person hasn't done this before and they don't have a clear idea, I haven't done it for a while, processes change, then we probably need to, again, get key stakeholders into a room and map all this out while we're mapping the requirements out. So this is also really going to helpfully tell us how long this process might take, because the last thing, particularly in the companies I work for, the last thing you want to do is sort of say, oh yeah, I think this is going to take 3 months, and it ends up taking a year. It makes you look silly, right? And you lose credibility through that process. And so that, I think, leads me nicely on to the next one, which is the paper process. In some organizations, this is really quick. I've worked in deals that can be done same day. Once they make a decision, they just buy. There's no real massive legal process. They'll stand up, they'll sign up to the standard T's and C's. So that is easy. But on the other end, I've had paper processes that have lasted over a year. A big bank that I won't name that I've sold into, their legals took over a year. And unfortunately, I had to go through that process twice. So 2 years of my life but spent just going through this bank's paper process. Completely crazy, but that's just the way it is in highly regulated organizations. So we really want to try and understand what that paper process is as early as possible. It's because it could factor into the POC that we need to check. There could be some paper process around compliance sign-off, InfoSec sign-off. So we want to try and understand that fairly early if we can, particularly if it's regulated and things like that. And then try and kick it off as soon as possible. I mean, if we know we're the chosen solution, let's just start, right? If the champion really wants to get this thing going and close this as quickly as possible, then they'll start that paper process very, very early. And other things, you could have like an NDA or some sort of security sign-off process right at the start as well, before you can even go into a POC. So really important to try and understand this as early as possible. And then lastly, in MEDDPICC, we've got competition. So I've sort of alluded to this a little bit when we've been talking about a number of these areas, but ultimately, who is the competition? Who are we up against, right? And that isn't just other technology vendors. That's also do nothing, stroke the existing solution. So it is very easy for a company to just stick with what they have. If there isn't enough pain, or the cost of migrating is too high, then chances are they'll just stay with what they got. And there's a lot of people within an organization who have a lot of interest in keeping the existing solution, particularly if that's their bread and butter, they're an expert in this technology. Do they really want to change? They might pretend, to everyone externally that they want to change. but actually in many cases, people will just prefer the existing solution. So we need to try and work that out. We need to be really aware of what that existing solution is, or, you know, the existing state of do nothing, and understand all the pains behind that. But we also need to understand who we're up against. And it is complete, if anyone tells you there's no competition, like, I just don't believe it. Companies are not spending tens of thousands of pounds, if not hundreds of thousands, millions on technology without having to look around to see what alternative there is. In many cases, they're mandated to. Large organizations have to go through a proper procurement process where they have to go and just ask other vendors to submit proposals, right? Even if they already know who they probably want to pick, they have to do it. Government, healthcare, banks, they absolutely have to do this. So you need to try and understand who the competition is and how you are uniquely different to them. More on this in a second. But that's super important, because the sooner you understand that, the sooner you can not only sell against the pain that that customer has, that prospective customer has, but you can drop in comments, details about how you are uniquely different or better than your competition. Really, really important here. Because if you haven't got ahead of that and drip fed information and try and deal with that, then you can guarantee your competitors doing the same against you. FUD, as we call it, fear and doubt, ultimately, that we have this all the time in technologies that we're selling. So people are always trying to, like, basically badmouth you. It's not great practice. You can do it in a really good way, I think, but it's very, very, very easy for fear and doubt to be sowed in a competitor's mind, in your company's prospect's mind, about your technology and how hard it's to migrate, or how expensive it might be, or about this little weakness that your technology has. So be ready, be prepared, understand what the competition is, have got through any likely kind of mud that they might have thrown at you, and be ready to kind of chuck a lot of mud back at them as well. Stan.
Yes. So indeed, I think it's very important to know, like, what differentiates you within the market, within your competitors. And I think we could fill like 3 or 4 webinars with all that content. So where I want to start is the fact that within Workspace 365, we have a standard solution. So it's plug and play solution. You could start today if you wanted to, but it's still highly personalized. So I think then you have best of both worlds, where we have like really role-based access at a deep level, which you don't see in a standard solution normally. Next to that, the integration framework. So what you see is that all platforms want to be the one and only interface, where within Workspace 365, we don't only connect all your Microsoft apps, or like the whole suite, which is Microsoft also doing. We don't only do the intranet. We really ensure that there's just one single point an end user knows with our integration framework, to get all the information with all different apps, with all different sources together. Next to that, which is very interesting and very new, with everything that's happening with Trump, is the fact that we have a self-hosted option. So back in the day, we did more self-hosted. You saw the trend that everything went SaaS. We have a lot of SaaS solutions with different intranets. But if needed, we could do self-hosted again, more and more and more, if it's required from a customer. So I don't think we should like directly act on it, but within all my conversations with a lot of customers, you see that it's part of the meeting that we talk about, okay, so what are we going to do if something is happening with X, or how do we make sure that we are safe for all those things. So I think that's very unique, especially from all the other SaaS solutions, and the fact that you only pay for what you need within our modules. So I think those are a few highlights I wanted to mention, because we are talking about the fact that you need to know how do you differentiate from the other solutions. But we have covered this also within our battle cards. So we made butter cards for all our competitors, where you just can see in depth which is the difference between for example, MEDDPICC, which is the difference between SharePoint and Braze and all of them. We can't cover that today because we only have 45 minutes, because you can look at it into the partner portal. Everyone has access to. And next week, we will discuss one specifically because it's requested the most. And that is Workspace versus SharePoint analysis. So that will also be the next webinar. Last webinar and this webinar are especially about MEDDPICC, a method we use ourselves, which also helps a lot with the general sales process. And next webinar will be more about our product and really in depth the difference between SharePoint versus Workspace 365. And last but not least, we are going to do this webinar like every month. So these two webinars were about MEDDPICC. Next is going to be SharePoint. And you will all get an overview next week about the webinars for the rest of the year, which we have scheduled to help you. And you can also deliver input in the topic of the webinar. So as I said, SharePoint is highly requested. Therefore, it's going to be the next. But I think it's really good to have your input, because that's this whole webinar is to help you, and therefore we need your input. I saw one question in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we should have like a technical validation, but the short answer is yes. Until now, you have like all the options for a self-hosted option. Therefore, the responsibility for the partner is also to keep the version of Workspace 365 up to date. So of course, there are a few conversations we need to have, but the short answer is yes. And therefore, we are also very happy with everything that's happening, that we don't have to worry. If needed, we can switch, because customers, especially we talk to healthcare and government especially, they feel like they are a bit scared of like the whole Microsoft cloud thing and their dependency especially.
Cool. Shall I move on, Sam? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think just to say, if you've got any requests for any kind of sales related things, then, you know, we cover a lot here at Aries. So yeah, a particularly good one, I think, is like the art of discovery. So that's a good session. So yeah, if you've got any ideas or things that you'd like to cover off, then please do let Stan know. Okay, so just to wrap out MEDDPICC very quickly, for me, this is like the #1 kind of sales framework process, as some people call it, that everyone talks about in technology sales. So becoming a master at this will not only help you be more successful in your sales role, but it will also help you progress your career. Having this on your CV is a definite plus. Many of the firms that I've worked at, and when we're hiring ourselves, we want this experience. And if someone doesn't have it, that's a not a red flag, but it's just something that we're gonna have to spend a lot of time training people up on. But ultimately, for me, this is going to help you navigate deals. That's the biggest thing here, right? What's missing? What do I need to find out? What do I need to do next? You can run around in very large organizations trying to sell forever and get nowhere. This is the guide to how to do it really efficiently, so we can close deals with as little time spent on them as absolutely possible, which is important, right? Because all we're trying to do here is close as many deals as possible. And so the quicker we can close them, the more efficiently we do it, the more we can work, more deals we can work, and the more money we can make, which is what we're all trying to do here, right? I think. So this kind of then is the summary of MEDDPICC. I'm not going to spend too long on this. Don't worry, like you'll have this as a recording, and hopefully Stan will share the slides with people. But this is just going to quickly going to provide you with all the definitions and the key considerations of MEDDPICC. I'm not going to go through this now, but moving on to the last part of our session, which is command of the message. So for me, this is really how we bring all of MEDDPICC together to sell via what we call value-based selling. So this is just a little quick introduction to the subject of value-based selling. And really, when I think about this, is like, if I was to say to you, how would you sell your services, your technology, how would you do it? And without this kind of framework, I think you would get many answers. People would say, oh yeah, we got these capabilities, that's why we're the best. We've got local people, for local businesses, we've got a great service level, we've got XYZ, right? We've got this technology, this capability, we integrate with these platforms. These are all kind of perfectly valid points, but how do you bring all that together into a convincing story, or a way to articulate your product, your services? And so one way that you could do this is via the value framework, or command of the message. And this is a capability that some very expensive consultants charge millions for, to come and bring this into organizations. So just going to quickly run through this now, and it won't cost you a penny. So there you go. But ultimately, what we're going to do when we're telling the value proposition of our product or services is we piece this together into the before state. So there's a company that had this scenario, and they had this negative consequences. And as a result of our solution, they had these benefits that came out of it. And in order to deliver those benefits, they had certain required capabilities. There were certain metrics that they had to deliver upon, or were able to achieve. And we were able to do that better than anyone else by doing XYZ. And here's an example. So that's the kind of framework that we can use to succinctly communicate the value proposition of our product, right? And if we take this into a Workspace 365 perspective, and again, you could build this out for any service, any product offering that you have and you use. But specifically, if we were talking about here, we could tell a story about this, right? So there was a customer, right, who they had employees, and so this is healthcare employees, in the healthcare sector, and they had those employees spending far too long doing admin type tasks, looking for their data, looking for the right application. They're really busy. They've got long waiting lists of patients that they need to see, and they're spending far too much time doing all of that, right? And they were struggling to focus because there was more applications, more files, data, and places to look for those data and communication than ever before. So this was making them very unhappy. The negative consequence of this was making them really unhappy. They weren't productive. They weren't able to see all their patients. And this was leading to high staff turnover, very high staff turnover in certain industries like healthcare, particularly in the UK anyway. So that was the problem that this organization faced, right? And where they wanted to get to, really, their solution was to have a platform that allowed them to access all of their apps, all their data, all their communications in one quick, easy to find place, a single pane of glass, right? Saving them an absolute fortune of time, and allowing them to see more customers. So that was, the example of a particular company that had that particular challenge and where they want to get to and the outcomes they want to deliver. And they were able to do that really because of Workspace 365. And they picked Workspace 365 because it integrated with Microsoft 365. It was able to support both their legacy on-premise solutions and the new cloud applications that they were using. It integrated with their calendar, their email, made that all really simple and seamless. And it also supported all their communication channels and collaboration. So it was like two-way communication, right? So that's really why they picked Workspace 365. And with Workspace 365, they were able to save 15 to 30 minutes per day per employee, right? That was the value that was delivered by Workspace 365. And they did it because their solution allows them to bring all of that together, all of their applications into one place, both legacy and so on, right? And they do it better than their competition because actually one of the key things here, right, is that they can integrate anything, both Microsoft products and non-Microsoft products, which every organization has, right? So that's really why they were able to do it. And a really good example of this, right, was it Mostware? Right, and they talking about the communication they have, and I love this story. Right, they were saying that before Workspace 365, the employees, were really fragmented. They had no social cohesion. Everyone was working remote, hybrid. People didn't really get to hang out together. But with Workspace 365, they were now able to see all of those communications, and staff even started turning up to the Christmas party. So hopefully what that's shown you is that using this framework, you can tell a very convincing story. And that could be a shorter story than I've just said, or a much longer story, depending on the kind of circumstances that you're in, right? But hopefully that what shows you is this is a way to actually communicate the value proposition succinctly, clearly into things that, sections that really matter and that a potential client can relate to. Cool. So we're at time now. So just to wrap up here, with some great books that you can read. If you want to learn more about what we've talked about today or in the previous session, these are the two books that I would go read. I mean, there's many books, but number one, if you read any sales book ever in your entire career, it is John McMahon's book, The Qualified Sales Leader. This guy is on board of Snowflake, board of MongoDB, 5 times legendary CRO. He's worked at more big companies that have been super successful than I think any other CRO, and he is now very active on many boards of companies. Very, very successful. This book is no fluff. It is phenomenal. So please, if you read one book, it's this. And then the other one is Andy White, who is a very much a go-to person on MEDDPICC, and lots of free resources, but he also provides training. So if you were to look at this and maybe look at some of his courses, I think that would be a very good thing for you to do as well. So yeah, thank you very much. Any last questions before we wrap up today? Stan,
and also in the chat, no, there are for now no questions, but please ask, guys. As I said a few slides ago, we want your input to create more webinars. Webinars are here to help you. So in the chat, Leonie shared a forms link where you can give topics, feedback, so we can improve these sessions to make it even better.
Yeah, and even if that feedback is you never want to hear from me again, please do please do let me know. Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Thanks everyone for joining. I think that's it, right? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for watching. If you have questions later on, please give me a chat. I think everyone here has my my email address. So if something is popping up, please ask.
Awesome. Very nice turnout.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Have a lovely weekend. I hope it's sunny. It's lovely today, but it's going to rain all weekend, I think, for us in England. So I hope it's better for you where you are.
We have the Saturday. That's better. Sunday is also rainy.
I was looking forward to a barbecue. Anyway, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.